Welcome to episode 2 of NTT20, the England pod. Domestic season in the can, save for a Champions League final involving one England superstar in Jude Bellingham. I'm Ali Maxwell. I've got George, Elek and David Walker with me. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hi, mate.
Are you Dave or David?
David Cameron.
I'm many things to many different people, it seems.
That always worries me hearing that.
Yeah.
You've been, because you are formerly David Cameron Walker, you've been on my phone as David Cameron Walker since I've known you.
Yeah.
And it means that we've got a WhatsApp group that is us three. We've had it for a while. And at the top where it says underneath the title, the people who are in it, it just says, you, Ali, David Cameron, which I always find funny.
There you go. Yeah. But then some, podcast-wise, like on football cliches, I think Adam would say David Walker at the top, but then call me Dave throughout.
Right. God,
So,
it's a lot to think about.
DCW
yeah.
as well.
But that doesn't quite, it's a bit of a mouthful, that, actually. Often
Yeah.
roll it together and it sounds a bit weird. So stick with Dave, I think. That's fine.
If you were playing centre-back for England at Wembley,
Yeah.
what would you want the stadium announcer to say? Number 5.
David Walker.
Yes, it sounds good.
But then
doesn't
what
it?
would you shout if you're going out for a header?
Well, when I play Sunday League,
And not mine, because that's a free kick.
When I first joined my Sunday League team, Ribblesdale Rovers, which, as we said last episode, Ali plays for.
And I'm soon to make my debut.
There were I think there were at least 3 Daves or Davids already in the squad. So when I introduced myself, actually my first ever pre-season training session, I had to say, just call me DC, which is what some people call me. So when I play football and I'm going up for a header, it's DCs.
Trying to think of a footballer with DC. No.
How about Des Walker, 59
That's what
England
I
caps?
was going to say. Do you go up to Des and go, Walkers? But
No.
Yeah, we've already had a D Walker with a lot of England caps.
DC.
There's an Elek, Akos Elek, with a lot
Yeah.
of Hungary caps.
I backed him to score in a Hungary game and I was watching it Euro something, and I think it would work, and I was very upset. Big price though.
80s/90s Scottish goalkeeper Ali Maxwell. 1 cap for Scotland v. So less.
He's once been sent a payment order for you, hasn't he?
Yeah, did some work for the BBC and they paid the wrong Ali Maxwell. Absolutely fuming I was.
And you got introduced at, where was it? Where you got introduced?
Charlton.
Amazing.
Yeah, talking to us today in the VIP Sponsors Lounge, EFL podcaster and former Rangers goalkeeper, Ali Maxwell.
And he was there.
Sitting there at 5'7" with a lot of confused VIPs. Guys, we're starting to get uber excited about the Euros.
As you can tell.
We're in what I would call the perineum between the end of the domestic season and the warm-up friendlies, which are next week, but still quite a lot to talk about over 2 episodes this week. How did you feel about the response to episode 1 and the launch, if you like, of the England pod?
Yeah, it was great to see the majority of people saying good rather than what are you doing, guys? Stick to the EFL. We had 1 or 2 people saying that. That's okay. We understand that. As I said on our championship playoff review, like, this isn't a massive gear shift for us. Like, when the EFL comes back, we will be doing not top 20 again as it was. But we just felt like there was room for this. And from the majority of regular listeners who have got in touch, they seem pretty excited about it. And also friends of ours who have known what we've done for the last 8 years have absolutely no interest in ever listening to us talking about football outside the Premier League, suddenly listening and getting in touch, being like, hey, you and Ali are like quite good. It's like, thank you. That is why we do it as our job.
Or maybe it's Dave that's making us sound good.
Well, they didn't say that.
How did you feel about your debut, Dave? Obviously, done hundreds of pods for football cliches, but this one, your first one on the Not the Top 20 feed.
It was good. I really enjoyed it. It was a nice change of pace for me. Although I did think after last week that, you know, when I mentioned towards the top of the show that I'm not wouldn't necessarily consider myself a huge England fan as in someone that goes to games.
P45 on the spot.
Yeah, right. So I was thinking, well, that's not quite. I've not really painted the full picture there. What I mean is, I'm not someone that has gone to a lot of England matches in person, but I've obviously watched all the tournaments, followed the highs and the many lows, and I thought there was something that I could bring to the table just to show you my England credentials and how deep they run.
Yeah.
So I've delved back into somewhere that you probably should never go, and that is the very early days of Facebook.
Amazing.
Brilliant.
So I'm going to take you back to the 21st of November, 2007. That date ring any bells for you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Qualifiers for Euro 2008.
Croatia.
Yeah, exactly.
Croatia.
The famous, infamous night at Wembley. Croatia
Yeah.
knocked us out in qualifying, prevented us from going to Euro 2008. Wally with the brolly and all
I remember
that.
Mika Richards was very good from
Yeah.
memory.
I'm hoping this is going to be a really embarrassing Facebook status that you wrote after the game.
Well, it's a bit more than a status.
It's
So
a
on the
post.
22nd of November 2007, so we've gone over midnight here. So we're talking early hours of the following night. We'd watched that game in Nottingham's varsity bar. Actually had a great time watching the game with all the ups and downs, but obviously ended on a sour note. But after the night out, I've gone back home. I've fired up the desktop computer, as it was back then. And in the official I Hate Scott Carson group on Facebook, which I've
God.
found, I've posted the following. Okay, Carson fucked up for the first goal, but the blame lies with McLaren! Exclamation mark. If you look at the qualifying as a whole, we do not deserve to be there. We have been beaten by the better sides, i.e. Russia and Croatia. We failed to beat Macedonia at home. A team who cannot do that is not good enough for the European Championships. Yes, we have the players to succeed, but we do not have the team spirit, the tactics, or the manager to succeed. Today is a dark, dark day
This is great.
in English football. But I think it may be looked back upon in years to come as the day that we woke up and stopped bleating on about 66 and all that and started taking national football seriously again. It's time to start again from scratch. We are England and we deserve better than this. We'll be back and we'll be better for this experience. Bring on 2010.
Do you know what? I think that you could be England's version to what Michael Sheen is to Wales. Let's get you in the dressing room
I'm
before
not sure
a big
about
game
that.
and give the rousing speech. But like, I also love that you have, rather than do what Facebook was generally for, which is just, posting statuses out into the ether that people would see. You've tracked down the I Hate Scott Carson fan club.
I don't know how I found
You
it.
specifically wanted to get against the Carson haters.
I wonder if you sent out any pokes that night as well. Remember Facebook pokes?
It's entirely possible.
I imagine that's how
Yeah.
I handled the loss
Might
or the
poked Carson.
failure to qualify Croatia back in 2007. I mean, if we had a look back at ours, given that we were friends and Facebook friends back at that stage, I can say pretty definitively there'd be similar messages being sent, just like unbelievably serious.
Yeah. So earnest.
And now many years later, we're doing a podcast about it, which is a pretty classic progression, isn't it?
Yeah.
When our friendship briefly lapsed around that time, I think it was
After the incident?
It was only no, let's not make this Gavin and Stacey. The only way that I think we kept in contact for about 4 years was liking each other's Facebook statuses and commenting beneath them. So we should go back and see if there are any good England ones.
Yeah, a simpler time. I mean, in terms of credentials, if you like, England fan experiences, I suppose, George, ours have been a little bit more traditional. We both have spent a fair amount of our time following England overseas in major tournaments. Brazil 2014, probably the best 2 weeks of my life, I reckon.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you did better than I did.
Well, England were only there for a week. So
Wow.
I flew
what
out.
happened in week 2, Ali?
This is one of
I
the
got
funniest
that.
things that's ever happened, I reckon, in the whole world.
I flew out to Brazil the morning after the Uruguay game to watch England. So I've actually still got the photo of me making a sad face in my England shirt and Ali replying, holding up like a caipirinha in a fruit, and us saying, me being like, I'll see you in a couple of days. So the only game I went to in Brazil, because we couldn't get tickets for any other games because we were only going to go and see England, was we travelled to, I think it's the only England tournament game you and I have both been to.
Yeah.
Was England 0, Costa Rica 0, where we played all the players that had travelled.
I think
that
Ross
hadn't played the
Barkley
first-
might have.
Barkley played.
Ben Foster played.
The only thing that happened in the game was Frank Lampard hit a free kick from 30 yards about a foot over the bar. It was unbelievably hot, like so
Yeah,
hot,
that was
just
too
sitting
hot.
in the sun. And afterwards, the lot that I was with went out to a club. They told me where the club was. I was like, I can have one more drink with Ali, then I'll meet you there. Got in a cab, told them where the club was. Looked up about 10 minutes later, and we were driving out Belo Horizonte. I thought he was trying to kidnap me. Turned out he just put it into Google Maps, and it was somewhere about 5 hours away. So.
I've always thought of your Belo Horizonte taxi story as a bit of a Gavin and Stacey fishing trip. Like, you've never quite told us what happened.
No,
I think there
it's
might
fine.
be a bit more to it that we don't know about.
I accused him of trying to kidnap me, and he was really taken aback by that. And
Yeah.
it was very
Rightly
nice
so.
about it.
Yeah, I watched the Italy game at the fan park on Copacabana Beach in Rio on my birthday. Obviously, slightly ruined by the result and the fact that for about 3 minutes after Sterling's shot from range hit the side netting, we all thought that England were ahead. Then watched the Uruguay game.
Jonathan Pearce still thinks England are ahead.
Yeah, watched the Uruguay game in the stadium, and then we were knocked out. But I mean, you can't do much better than 2 weeks in Brazil at a World Cup when you're 21, 22. So fond memories. We made it out. Well, at least I made it out to Euro 2016 for the 0-0 draw against Slovakia in the third group game. So didn't get much better. At that point, I'd seen 2-0 draws against Costa Rica and Slovakia and a defeat to Uruguay.
I have my story for you for the 2016 is basically the same as the Brazil tournament, where I booked accommodation and travel and tickets to the game if England won our group in Paris, and we came second in our group. So instead, I went to Wales 1, Northern Ireland 0.
Why don't you tell us a bit about Russia 2018?
Also-
Because that was a bit more regulation.
But also, do you remember? I was getting married the day before the final in Euro 2020,
Remember
which
it
was
well.
in 2021, and so I had to go straight from Wembley, having watched England beat Germany, into 2 weeks of self-isolation, so that I made sure I wasn't didn't have COVID.
Of course.
Yeah, Russia was good. So yeah, if we're going to talk about our best, experiences or memories of supporting England, I think in terms of a live experience, it's very easy to forget that going into Russia, because of what's happened since, I think this deserves its place in the general kind of chat around Southgate and his time. I don't think England as a nation had ever been more negative about England's chances to succeed as we were going into Russia, to the extent that, and obviously the geopolitical situation played a part in this, but the amount of travelling England fans to Russia was minute. And I went to the first England game against Tunisia, and I was one of
In Nizhny Novgorod?
and I was one of 2,000 England fans, I think.
Yeah.
It was absolutely mad. And I was there behind the goal when Harry Kane nodded it in on the goal line, right in front of me. And that moment was, I think, what going to watch England in a major tournament's all about. The outpouring of relief, and especially in a first group game where, if you mess that up, if you don't win that first game, suddenly your whole qualification's in jeopardy, or it was then before, all the teams basically in the group went through. And then I was also at the Panama game that we won 6-0.
Yeah.
So that was
Banishing the demons of 2014 and
incredible.
2016.
And then I flew home. Yeah. So that was, I think that it's often forgotten, but I do think when you look at where we've come from, I think that Kane goal and what was a pretty dire performance, but definitely sparked something that ended up being a pretty mega summer and raised expectation levels massively.
I like that you've pointed that out, because even since we started doing this pod and thinking about England and engaging with a lot of England media and social media, it's so easy to get sucked into the vortex of negativity or always thinking about the issues, and it can kind of draw away from the sense of excitement ahead of a major tournament. But 2018 summer, 2021 summer, yes, England didn't win either tournament, but we've had some unbelievable summers recently supporting this England team with this manager, and people can be super focused on did they win the tournament or not. No, but I'm all about the friends we made along the way. That the summer of 2021, where I've rarely felt more fortunate than to have been at the Germany game at Wembley, the Denmark game at Wembley, and slightly less so the Italy game at Wembley, which was a shambles and a disappointment for a number of reasons. But that was in the context of us having been locked down in our flats and houses 3 times in the 15 months leading up to that, football having stopped for a period, the joy, the genuine joy, and the national joy, collective joy that feels hard to achieve in any other setting other than England doing pretty well at a major tournament is I don't want to be snide about that. I don't want to take that for granted. And I really hope that we get something like that this summer.
I think we will. I think there's a good chance that we will. The Germany game, I was at the Germany game in the last Euros. It was an amazing match, an amazing atmosphere. My abiding memory is a couple of things. Is one, Thomas Muller missing the one-on-one and it being celebrated in the stadium was almost as much as a goal. And then when Kane scored his first goal of the tournament at that point, and to get the second goal and pretty much put it beyond doubt, the celebrations were unbelievable to the point where literally I sort of saw something in my peripheral vision, and a body just came tumbling down the seats. We were quite near the back at Wembley, and there was this woman who just, I don't know whether she'd intentionally sort of jumped up, or whether she tripped, or whether she'd had too much to drink, or whatever what happened, but she just tumbled down these seats, and I basically had to like stop celebrating and like make sure she was okay, pick her back up. And she was thankfully she was fine. Yeah. I mean, I think she was a bit shocked, but like she was also kind of still celebrating and still happy. But it kind of summed up the absolute chaos, and you saw sort of some of the scenes down the front of the stadium on those little netted off sections of Wembley, because there was segregation and the sort of COVID measures were still in place. People just sort of tumbling down those, and it was incredible. But do you know what also happened that day, which at the time was amazing, but I think it ages worse and worse with each sporting occasion that we've had since. We had the DJ at England at Wembley that day decided on a whim to play Sweet Caroline. And at that moment it was brilliant.
Yeah.
But I love it less and less each time I hear it from now on.
George and I watched the Southampton fans at Wembley last weekend, winning the Championship playoff final, celebrating while Freed from Desire played. A sea of red and white jumping up and down. And I was like, summer of 2021, we were doing that, celebrating England beating Germany and Denmark. Same song, well, plus Sweet Caroline, bouncing up and down in red and white. And that Freed from Desire song, obviously popularised in 2016 by the Northern Irish fans, feels like we need a new anthem for sure this summer. I think that could be a part of the pod, is trying to get in front of or predict what, and hopefully a good sort of new anthem for England's success.
Maybe we should try and force it.
Yeah? What, start a campaign? Maybe release a single ourselves?
Any suggestions? Please let us know.
So I suppose that's where...
And just on that Germany point, just because one thing I wanted to bring up was one thing I hated so much when he spoke to people about England in major tournaments. They'd always bring up this thing by saying, who have you ever beaten that's any good? And it was kind of true. You look back at even good tournaments for England in the past, they'd always got there through quite favourable draws. And yes, it was at Wembley. And yes, we were going into the game favourites with the bookmakers. But after we beat Germany and did it so in pretty convincing circumstances, it felt like something had shifted that day, where actually we could be like, well, we beat Germany in the what was it, round of 16, wasn't it?
Yeah. So I suppose a lot of our main in-person memories come from since we've been adults. I think it's worth, just touching on the fact that I reckon World Cup '98 was probably my first major tournament for England. From then until we lost to Germany in 2010, that was just a period where I just remember crying a lot.
Yeah.
I was a child that was easy, quick to tears anyway, and England being knocked out of a major tournament was absolutely guaranteed waterworks. I reckon by the time we lost to Italy on pens in 2012, I think that was post tears, and there hopefully won't be any tears this summer. There haven't been since, and maybe at some point over the summer, if there's time for it, I'll try and pitch to the listeners why following England under 21s at the under 21 Euros is one of the best trips that you can do, and my time in Poland 2017 with George, Italy 2019, and Georgia 2021. 2023. Lee Carsley's beautiful unders. Great memories as well.
Do you think you cry tears of joy if England won the Euros?
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Mate, I like as an adult, I cry for joy more than I cry for sadness, I reckon. Like if I watch, and I don't watch X Factor, but just using this as an example, if I watch a clip of X Factor auditions that ends with someone getting a standing ovation and it potentially signifying the start of a new era for them, I cry every time.
Well,
I love glory.
Amazing that you mentioned that, because do you know what's happening literally around the corner from us today where we record?
BGT.
Britain's Got Talent's on.
Really?
I walked past it on the way here.
Mate.
Get down there.
Get the tissues.
I was asked that question on my way to Wembley 9 days ago, and I said I don't know, and we won. Oxford won, and I cried.
Oh.
So I think the answer is definitely yes to that. I remember being at school and watching. I reckon it was one of the Portugals. Actually, probably a bit earlier than that. No, it would have been the first.
I reckon it was 04 Portugal.
It would have been Postiga, I think.
Yeah.
And I remember crying and a teacher coming to get me and him saying, it's going to be fine. Got great players coming through. We've got... Any guesses?
Darius Vassell?
No.
Wayne Rooney,
Well,
I would hope.
Rooney's too obvious, maybe. What?
How about Carlton Cole?
Oh, there you go.
And that was the one, he was obviously the player that was perceived then to be the saviour.
Thinking about the Slovakia 2016 game, Rooney came on off the bench to play in midfield, and my whole memory of the last 40 minutes is an old Wayne Rooney spraying crossfield balls out wide to Daniel Sturridge or Adam Lallana, I think, were playing in the wide areas. And, to segue on to some discussion about the current England team and some bits off the back of last week's episode, like, we are very fortunate as England fans with the squad that we have now, with the players that we have now. And whatever happens this summer, it's unlikely to be as bleak as that, right? Like, Dave, you talked about that as a.
If we're going to go viral, that could be the clip, I think.
But I think, like, Dave, you talked about the France World Cup game last week on last week's episode, and England's defeat. Not that it was easy to take, but in terms of how England performed and the way that they played, it is chalk and cheese to some of those eras, I would suggest.
100%. We had a series of, defeats on penalties, obviously, but then also a few absolutely hapless exits as well, like in 2016 and 2010. And narratives would be painted around the team or whatever, but really you were kind of clutching at straws a lot of the time because really we were just never good enough. Even when we had all those players in the so-called golden generation, like, we didn't ever really play that well. Maybe in patches here and there, but like certainly in the big decisive games we didn't really. But that France game, as I said last week, I think we did really play well, and ultimately we still lost. Giroud still was the difference, and we had to rely on penalties, one of which we missed, and we weren't good. We weren't good enough in that respect. But we certainly took the game to them, and we were, I would say, at least on a level footing with a team that had won the World Cup 4 years before, got to the final that same tournament, and only lost it on penalties. In an incredible back and forth match. So, and I think that's reflected probably why we're favourites for this tournament with the bookies, which is something that I don't think has ever happened before. I was trying to look on this last night, trying to look for some sort of historic pre-tournament odds, which is sort of quite hard to come by. But from what I did,
especially in 1966,
yeah, right. But from what I did find, I couldn't see at any time that we were outright favourites. We've been sort of second, third, fourth favourites quite often, but we've never been outright favourites. And you could question why we are that, because as I said, we went out to France, and maybe France should be favourites for this time round or whatever. But there are lots of different factors. But we are a proper serious team who have done actually very well since that defeat to France. In the 12 matches we've played since, we've won most of them.
Yeah.
The last few we haven't won, so maybe that's an issue. But me and Ali watched all of the goals since the last World Cup, and there's a lot to be positive about.
Why are we favourites for the Euros, George? We haven't got winning pedigree, and for example, France absolutely have that. Portugal have a squad on paper that is on a similar level to ours, I would suggest, and have, I think, a potentially easier path. To what extent that gets factored in, I'm looking at you because you know a lot about betting, and I'm wondering, I'm trying to think as objectively as possible. Even objectively, I look at that and I wince a bit and think, how have they got to this situation where we're quite strong favourites?
I would say that it's hard to explain why we are, but there are a couple of myths around why we are that you can basically rule out. Like there's always that idea of people being like, well, of course we're favourites, we're in England, and therefore the bookies have probably taken more money on England, so therefore they're going to, or they just know they're going to take bets, so they make it a shorter price. That might have been the case 20 years ago when bookmakers had to price up things kind of using a bit more trader insight rather than now, where you have an incredibly liquid exchange. And an exchange is like the Betfair exchange, for example, where you've got money that queues up on either side of a price, and that dictates where the price is. And right now, if you go onto the Betfair exchange market for the Euros, England are the favourites, and there's 12.5 grand queuing to back England at 4.1, which is just over 3-1. There's 15 grand queuing to back England at 4.2. Like, this is a liquid market where the price is dictated by world forces rather than just a guy sitting in his office deciding what the price is, and therefore bookies are going to follow suit. It's more complex than that. Like, obviously, if a bookmaker has laid England to lose millions of pounds, they might be using the exchange in order to get some of that back and manage their liabilities. But it's such a complex mechanism to get to that price that it's just not the case where it's like, oh well, it's a bias. These prices are now reflected worldwide. You wouldn't, for example, go to Italy and suddenly be getting 8-1 about England. That's just not how it works anymore. So that in part explains it. And I'd also say, obviously there are market inefficiencies and there are elements where they might be wrong, but for the most part, the market will be more right than you are. And I'm not saying you particularly. I'm saying you plural, like one. I remember going to Wembley to watch that England-Germany game, and I couldn't believe that we were favourites. Like, it blew my mind. I was like, this has just got to be wrong. And then the game gets underway, and you're like, all right, we are the better team here, we're the dominant force. Like, it's not.
So this time round,
Yeah.
footballing wise,
Yeah.
do you think England deserve to be favourites?
Yeah. Yeah. I think not necessarily. I wouldn't be backing us at 3-1, but I don't think the market will be so wrong that we are 4.0 and the next best of France at 5.3. I'm sure the amount of things that will go into that will be very complex. Like, obviously, the pathway will come into it. Obviously, the difficulty of the group. There'll be a lot of underlying numbers from previous games and previous tournaments that will come into it too. I think there's probably a perception with France, I would guess, that they've overachieved in recent tournaments. Where have they been? Were they the best team 4 years ago? Were they the second best team last time? Possibly not.
Went out to Switzerland in the last Euros.
Yeah, exactly. And I would also, I'd say that I think within this country, it's gone the other way, where 10, 15 years ago, I think we were almost kind of the laughing stock of Europe, where there was such belief in our squads and we believed we were capable of winning and we were massive underachievers. And I think everyone else looks at us being like, lads, you're not that great. Like, you got Lampard and Gerrard, but like, you've never done anything before. I think there was.
Do you think now we're more respected maybe around the rest of Europe than we are at home?
100%. Like, I think there was an interview with Virgil van Dijk that went out last week where he was basically like, obviously England are the favourites. Like, if you've seen your squad, it's insane. And I think maybe there is a part of that will be because the strength of depth of the Premier League is crazy now, where, you look at teams like Crystal Palace, for example, who are full of players who are playing for England who are top quality, which wouldn't have been the case previously. So therefore, I don't think we necessarily give the credit to lower down.
And we spend all our time, which we've already done and which we'll continue to do, sort of obsessing over the fact that who's going to play left back?
Yeah.
Have we really got someone to play alongside John Stones? Is Harry Maguire fit, etc.? I think I saw Jamie Carragher make the point on Stick to Football this week that we've got the best player in the Premier League, La Liga, and the Bundesliga.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's mad. And also, and there were people out there saying, like, hold on, you look at European competitions this season, and that doesn't agree that England's Premier League teams are the best, and that's definitely true. But when you actually look at the financial output of Premier League teams compared to those who beat them, like whether it's Atalanta beating Liverpool or whether it's Olympiacos beating Aston Villa, like, those were massive upsets in terms of actually the amount of money that is pumped into these clubs compared to the European counterparts. So, yeah, I think England are favourites on merit. But you have to remember still that a 3-1 chance is still a 25% chance of winning. This isn't us saying, like, we're more likely to win than not. It's just, of all the teams out there, we probably got the best chance. And realistically, not having won it before, for a fan, for a layman, comes into it massively. Realistically, it probably makes no difference.
One of the things that's been really interesting to do in the last couple of days has been to shift focus from, let's think back to the last major tournament, the World Cup, and maybe the one before that, the Euros, and let's refresh ourselves on what's happened since we lost to France in the World Cup in Qatar, Dave. And I don't always have the strongest steer of what the general narrative is about England, but I think, having looked back at the 12 games that we've played since the World Cup in Qatar, that broadly things have been pretty good. It was another incredibly straightforward qualifying campaign. Southgate's England have made a habit of making them look dead easy, which is great, and possibly a little overlooked because we take it for granted maybe. But we've played 12 games since we lost to France. We've won 8, we've drawn 3, and we lost that 1 to Brazil back in March, 1-0 to that Endrick goal. Just in terms of going back through the games that we've played, what would you say were the themes that kind of stood out from England's performances over the last, 20 months or so?
I think the main thing that jumped out, so looking at all of those matches, watched all the highlights back, all the goals we scored, and the few that we conceded, the big thing that jumped out at me was just how important Bukayo Saka is to this England team. He is not just a creator, and he does that really well. He's great at cutting inside and whipping in a sort of deep cross to the back post, which he's done a number of times for Kane and others to finish off. He's scored loads of goals himself.
Yeah.
He's come close to scoring even more goals than that as well. There's been matches like the 1-1 draw against Ukraine where he hit the bar and nearly won it for us, but he's scored a hat-trick in one of the games. Like he scored some really, really good goals as well. And I sort of think, in a way, he kind of gets forgotten about a little bit in the general discourse around England, because you've heard a lot of people saying, "Oh, Cole Palmer's had such a great season playing on the right wing, cutting inside onto his left for Chelsea. I'll get him in there. We've got to start him.
Find a place for him.
He's in form."
Yeah.
Saka is part of that group of untouchables for England. I think Southgate will believe that too. I think that'll be borne out by the team selection, and unless there's injury or a need to rotate.
And he's also had like a breakout season in terms of. Yeah. He's obviously been brilliant for ages, but his goal output has gone up this season from open play. Almost think he's a victim of just being so consistently good and polished, where he's not volatile. He's not one of those wingers who can on his day be unplayable, but sometimes not. Like he's Ali's favourite.
High floor.
Yeah.
He's just always good. Yeah. And sometimes next level exceptional.
Yeah. And plays all the time. Obviously that's been a topic of conversation around Arsenal and stuff. Towards the end of the season, I think he did miss a couple of games through injury and through being taken out of the firing line. Yeah. But generally for Arsenal, he plays almost every minute.
I've been worried about England lacking a very specific part of attacking threat that I think is really important, and that's runners in behind, which stems from the fact that Kane likes to drop in, is not someone that has the speed to play on the shoulder of a centre-back and offer that depth, if you like. But actually watching the highlights of the last 18 months has slightly allayed my fears there. Saka is a big part of it, because when I think of him playing for Arsenal, I think of him receiving the ball coming off the touchline with a lot still to do, and his 1v1 dribbling is good. He can obviously score that shot, left-footed curler from outside the box. But actually for England, he has fulfilled that role pretty well of making really good, quick, hard-to-track runs in behind and being found by Kane's through balls. But not only that, even if he isn't doing that, very notable how Bellingham likes to run off the ball and get in behind Kane as well. And so I've been focusing in the last few weeks a bit more about like, what sort of player do we need to play off the left? I thought someone like Sterling basically was happy being an off-ball player really, and just stretching the defence and keeping them honest by always threatening to run onto a Kane through ball. But now I'm a little bit less worried than I was, having seen Bellingham and Saka over the last 18 months or so continue doing what they did at the World Cup, which is offering that threat in behind. And both of them happen to be excellent on the ball as well, which is a great boost.
I think we've really seen in that qualifying campaign in the friendlies the emergence of Bellingham as a leader on the pitch with England. He played some minutes in the Euro 2020, not many, but he was part of the squad. Still very young then. He played most of the minutes in the World Cup, but apart from, I think he got a goal in the group stage, but didn't really make an impact in the game against France, really. Whereas now you've seen him playing for Real Madrid, scoring winners in Clásicos and nearly being the top scorer in the league, certainly being considered the best player in a title-winning team for them, Champions League final this week. He's grown in stature, and I think you could see that as well with the moment that he scored in the last dying seconds against Belgium to rescue the 2-2 draw in England's last friendly. It almost looked like after he scored, he almost looked annoyed. It was almost like, oh, all right, I'll do it, lads.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
If he's got to be me, I'll do it. And I think you'll see that there'll be moments in this tournament, hopefully, where he'll step up and he might score a goal in the last minute to get us through in a big game. And I think his development is a huge positive for England from the last World Cup.
And mentality-wise, I have so much trust in Saka, the consistency that we've talked about. Bellingham is just, hero status is something that will rest easily on his shoulders. Kane is Kane. Clearly he missed the penalty against France. That was a really poor moment for him. But I think overall his body of work suggests, despite no major trophy in his career, that he's still an excellent and dependable world-class player for England. Like, I'm starting to realise why we're favourites here, because we haven't mentioned Foden, who I expect to play a lot of minutes as well, probably off the left. Although earlier I talked myself into Foden playing off the right and Saka holding the width on the left. But I think I'm flip-flopping too much. I'm overthinking this a bit too much. But you can, it is an interesting question for Southgate. But if we just take those four players, I mean, Saka scored 20 goals across the Premier League and the Champions League this season. Kane scored 44 goals across the Champions League and the Premier League this season. Foden scored 24 goals plus another 3 in other cup competitions, and Bellingham scored 23 in all competitions. So, it's not a surprise that a team, whatever the name of the team is and the history of the nation, any team that has those four, and we should say a very good defensive record over quite a long period of time now, is favourites for the tournament.
Also worth remembering, and this surprised me, is that we hadn't won in 6 games going into Qatar. So our previous 6 games, we hadn't won a single one of them, and that included a 4-0 defeat at home to Hungary. So I think it's very easy to get quite bogged down in, obviously I remember in that international break back in March with the Brazil game and the Belgium game, a lot of the discourse on social media was like, well, we're never going to win if we can't beat Brazil or whatever, like a poor Brazil team at home. It's irrelevant. Like, these friendlies, and the same will be the case when we go up to Newcastle on Monday next week. The same will be the case against Iceland, where winning is obviously the aim of the game. But frankly, I think we could probably draw both of those games, and it wouldn't have a massive. Yeah. It's like a preseason friendly into a season. Like, anyone who's reading too much into this stuff, who doesn't see that the most important thing probably is that all players come through it fitter than they were before. The players who need minutes get minutes. No one gets injured. And B, you can work on stuff tactically that you might not even use when it comes to the tournament. That's the aim of those games. So I think what you're saying in terms of the stylistically things we've seen over the last few months or year or so is important. But at the same time, I think as soon as we take to the pitch in our first game out in Germany, things will whatever's gone before will be largely relevant.
Just encourages me how much that group of world-class players have played together for England under the same manager in broadly the same roles and formation, how much comfort they already have playing together. I think that is probably it's so hard to measure that telepathy and its importance heading into a major tournament, but it certainly can't hurt versus maybe, a group that's still chopping and changing and still getting used to playing with each other in the build-up. We're going to talk more specifics about the squad and about the warm-up friendlies in the next episode. I just want to talk about Kane, because even though I watch all the games and Kane seems to score in every single one, it still surprised me to remember or be reminded that the first game after the World Cup, he broke our all-time goal-scoring record against Italy, and he scored 9 in 9 post-World Cup. He missed the March friendly, so he hasn't played all 12. 9 goals in 9 games. I think he only failed to score in 2 of them. Just an incredibly consistent goal scorer. Now, it is true that a lot of them are pens, and we do seem to get an inordinate amount of penalties.
Territory plus ball carriers equals penalties.
Yeah. And I've already told Dave this, so I won't quiz him. Kane has scored 62 goals for England.
Yeah.
He's well past the record now. How many do you think have been penalties?
20.
Exactly 20.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
so
fun.
Just less than 1 in 3 goals have been pens, which
if only it was 21.
Seems like a lot.
Interesting. If you think of the most famous penalty misses in England history, or the most pivotal, Gareth Southgate, Harry Kane against France, Bukayo Saka against Italy.
Yeah.
Where's David Batty?
I take that as
no one knows where he is. So
I know where
fishing
he is,
in the
actually.
south of France.
Do you actually know where he is?
I might play golf with him a few weeks
No
ago.
way.
nice.
A few weeks ago.
Yeah.
So just after
But my
quickly
mate- my
Kevin
mate
ends,
is-
you can solve the mystery.
Exactly, yeah. But my mate is he's a football fan, but like he's not plugged into the football media world,
Right.
shall we say? So I said to him, "Oh wow, like how was he? Like you do realise that he's like the most sought after sort of interview, in sort of British football, right?"
Yeah.
And he was like, "Oh yeah, he seemed all right, but didn't really
Where
didn't
do
really
they
chat much
play?
about football."
Even
It was up north,
Northallerton,
somewhere.
I reckon.
Yeah.
Okay.
somewhere near Leeds. Kane's playmaking shouldn't be forgotten in this discussion, and it's very important for the way that England play. Bellingham's emergence in that really attacking midfield role is also exciting because it means we've got real quality in that crucial area of the pitch, which I think helps a team go from like quite stodgy to a really good and varied attacking team at international level. Then there's the fact that Saka's going to be coming inside. Foden likes taking up those spaces as well. So hopefully it won't get clogged up. But I mean, some of Kane's assists are just as good as his goal scoring. One for Kyle Walker against Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's absolutely incredible.
The balls from deep.
And watching Trent play midfield against Malta was a good reminder that against a tiny minnow nation that wasn't putting much pressure on him, he can basically do whatever he wants with a football because he had an amazing assist in that game and scored a worldie from 25 yards. So, and we're only talking about the team in possession at the moment and the team in attack, which is fair enough. It's the most exciting part of football, but we are good defensively. Like, even though people think Harry Maguire is a terrible defender, Harry Maguire's been a mainstay of an England defence that has pretty consistently for quite a few years now just been good, strong, good at defending its own box. Not many cheap goals given away. Obviously, Pickford passing it to Tielemans at Wembley in March, notwithstanding. The only theme I got from watching the goals we have conceded since the World Cup was a lot of the ones we have conceded coming down our left side, the opponent's right side. Could be completely random. Goals have to come from somewhere. But quite a few examples of like a bit of space on our left side or just our fullback. Chilwell at one point in particular, very notably, just getting done and then cutbacks being scored or tap-ins when the ball's fired across. So that would be basically the only and this is just watching the goals, by the way, so there's much more analysis that could be done. That would be the sort of chink in the armour, I'd say.
Interesting. I mean, it sounds like we've got an issue at left back.
Yeah, that's going to be a big part of the next episode. I think to finish, let's just do a bit of Southgate because any national football team discourse centres around the manager in a way that I don't particularly think is right at times. I think there's too much focus on the manager. I actually think compared to club managers, the impact of a national team manager is probably smaller on the performance and the results of the team, controversially.
Disagree,
than,
George?
I think I disagree. I think it's different for sure, and I think their job is different. I think what makes a good club manager and what makes a good international manager are probably very different. But I do think we have definitely, being an England fan, seen what having a manager who quite clearly isn't suited in any way to international management, such as Capello, how damaging that can be in terms of player morale and like bizarre tactical decisions. And similarly with Southgate, someone who isn't necessarily a master tactician, having someone who is incredibly adept at building a group in terms of wanting to play for England, in terms of having a kind of almost like a brotherhood between them, going to play for England, and how positive that can be. So I think different rather than less important.
In a way, I sort of feel like Southgate has built the most elite Sunday League team ever. Because, with Sunday League, like you,
This is what you're
Ali,
aspiring
right?
to.
Wasn't it that Carlsberg advert a few years ago with all the old
With all
England
the old
legends?
lads, which is still
probably the best Sunday League team in the world.
It's a lovely thing to watch, by the way. I saw it the other day. It's still great.
And we are
But, like,
still looking for a sponsor, by the way.
Carlsberg.
Ali, you said you play for my Sunday League team, right? But you're not a week in, week out regular.
Right.
Not by my choosing, by your lack of availability.
Yeah.
You say
But
he's
when
a bit-
you
he's a
come
bit Ben
along,
White.
you have a great time, and you know roughly how we play, and
Yeah.
you can slot in. And I sort of think, obviously, times a million, and at the absolute elite end of the scale, England's a bit like that.
Yeah.
There's this togetherness, and you sense that when they turn up, they know they're going to have fun. They're going to enjoy being with each other in the camps and then doing all the stuff they do around it. And they kind of know how the system works, and they're all used to playing in the same sort of ways. Whereas in the days where we were struggling, you always heard the famous stories about like the cliques in the dressing room, and the Capello, as you say, maybe weren't enjoying it. And
Yeah.
Roy was it fun under Roy Hodgson?
Didn't look it.
Maybe not exactly. Whereas you do get that real sense that it's fun to be in England and that they're friends. That genuinely these players who don't play with each other week in, week out at club level are friends. They're really happy to see Bukayo Saka when they see him because they know they're going to have a nice time in his company. And even in some intangible way, I think that translates into the pitch.
Is that a reflection, do you think, a little bit on modern day football, where rivalries? Yes, I know. Like, you have to look at the recent discourse between Arsenal and Spurs to know that, like, the rivalries are still fierce, but are they still fierce within, like, the playing group? Like, are there massive animosity between certain individuals in previous
Probably not in the
times?
same way.
No,
Probably not.
because these athletes are now
But
much more polished. They're like, they're not quite as
Yeah. I think the Spain national team that won it all, 3 consecutive
Put
major
paid to
tournaments, put paid to that, where half of them played for Real Madrid, half of them played for
Actually, they
Barcelona,
didn't like each other.
and the other one was Joan Capdevila.
yeah.
So either he was, the glue that held it all together, or it turned out that hating each other week in, week out at club level didn't have to mean that you couldn't play together for your
That's
for your
why our
nation.
pod's so successful.
But I mean, just in terms of, I think we are broadly on the same wavelength when it comes to Southgate, and I think we are Southgate apologists, or whatever sort of phrase you would want to use. I think we are broadly positive about his management of the England national team and the good times that we've had supporting them since he became our manager. But there is a loud group, whether it's a majority or a minority, I find it quite hard to tell. There is a loud group of people, Dave, who won't be sad if Southgate leaves after the Euros, whether England win. Well, that might change if England win, because he will be a national hero. But certainly if we don't win the tournament, we'll be very happy to see him go, and we'll be absolutely adamant that there is a manager out there who could manage England much better than Southgate.
There's definitely a big feeling. I know lots of people who hold that opinion, and the thing that's held against him time and time again, that he's too negative, or that he doesn't have the ability to change a game tactically. And you see where that's come from. Those 2 notable examples, the Croatia semi-final in 2018, the final against Italy in 2020. As I said last week, I think the France game was evidence of him learning lessons, and that he did have a tactical plan that worked against a top team in that game. I say it worked. It worked in terms of the balance of play. It didn't work in terms of the result. But you can't always judge things by the output. The input was ostensibly good, but unfortunately the output didn't get us where we needed to be on that occasion. Another thing that he's done as well is he has sort of learned lessons from high-profile defeats. So both times when we lost to Croatia and we lost to Italy, the next time we played them in competitive games, we beat them comfortably. We beat Croatia in the Nations League in the 2018-19 Nations League. We beat them at Wembley. I think we came from behind actually to beat them that day, and it was the game that secured our place in the little mini tournament finals. And then in the qualifying campaign this time around, we beat Italy twice, including obviously we beat them first of all away from home in the first game of the campaign. And that shows. You might look at it the other way and go, well, when it mattered, he didn't win. But then when it's in a qualifying game or a Nations League, he wins it. Fine, okay. But in terms of the timeline, he's lost to them in a big game, had them in a competitive game soon after, and he's beat them. So if we come up against France, as we may well do in this tournament, I'd back him to beat them.
Yeah, I think I would too.
The other stick to beat him with, George, is England's record against other top teams. This idea that you touched on, that the good periods of England have been helped by easy draws and easy fixtures in major tournaments. The Germany win notwithstanding, albeit they've been very poor in major tournaments over the last few. The stats support this to an extent, in that under Southgate, this is from a Telegraph article back in March, England have played 24 games against the countries currently ranked in FIFA's top 10, winning 7, drawing 7, and losing 10. So more defeats than draws and victories. If you look at a table of all of the top 10's results against other top 10 opponents, it does hammer home that beating the best teams in the world is hard, and they can't all win all the games. So France stand out massively. They have been brilliant, winning 70% of their games over 23 games against current top 10 opponents. I should say Germany aren't currently in the top 10, so England's win against Germany in the Euros 2021, Summer doesn't exist in this sort of mini league. And then Spain and Belgium have 42.9% win ratio and 35.3%. And then it's England on 30, so just under a third of the games they've won.
There's a massive irony to this whole thing, which is that, as we said there, the two issues people have with Southgate are the style of play and the negativity and not beating good sides. France, therefore, have to be like the blueprint for success, where you've got a team who've won loads. They've won the World Cup 4 years ago, and they've won, previously, but under this manager, they won the World Cup, got the World Cup final last time out. And yet, with a squad just as talented, with players like Mbappe and the rest, who are obviously, when you look at it on paper, incredible, in Deschamps, they have like the ultimate pragmatist. Like, they don't look to dominate possession. They don't play expansive football whatsoever. They play often like happiest on the counter-attack, like not particularly attacking football. And that is the way that often it works, as you can see there by their record against other major sides, where, coming at it with not having to impose yourself on games and not being under pressure to play attacking football can help. So, you can't really have it both ways. With Southgate in or Southgate out, I think there is also an element here where, firstly, it's very hard to be judged on winning tournaments that happen every 2 years, right? Because it's hard to win tournaments. One team can win a tournament, the other, 31 managers can't all be failures. And I guess it's probably only 10 or so.
France have only won 1 out of 4, but they went to the final in 2016. They lost.
Yeah.
They won it in 2018. They go out on penalties to Switzerland in 2020, and they get to the final, lose on penalties.
Yeah.
So that's only one. That's 1 out of 4.
No, but they've done 3 finals.
But they've done extremely well.
Yeah.
And it could easily have gone the other way.
For sure,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's always important to remember that 3 years ago we very nearly won the Euros. It was a penalty shootout that did for us. But with the Southgate out thing, like, is there a manager out there now who could do a better job than Southgate and get better results? Like 100% yes. Obviously there is going to be some people out there who would do a better job than him. That's just the way the world works. But how confident are you in the FA being able to find that person and appoint them? It's a massive risk. There's something to be said by having a guy in charge who's incredibly popular with the players, pretty popular for the most part with the fan base, who has England playing consistently at a level that makes us competitive at major tournaments. Like, you are inevitably rolling the dice by making the decision to end that, which could lead to more success in the future, or could lead to us being how we were for decades before that. Like, we're England fans. Like, before Southgate, winning these tournaments was a pipe dream, effectively, for most of us, and he's made that a reality.
Jordan asked a question which was, assuming Southgate will leave after the Euros, if you were in charge of hiring the next England manager, who would be your picks? And then, more interestingly for me, what qualities would you look for in an international manager? And it's a bit sad to say, but the qualities that sprung to mind for me, because I don't believe that finding this, like I just don't think international football management, we shouldn't be thinking about like club managers who have succeeded as being the obvious ones to take charge of England. It's just a completely different job. Like, it's almost a different sport. So, I mean, in terms of finding a name, it's almost impossible, because
that said,
you're only looking at four. Go on.
I'd take Jurgen Klopp.
Yeah. So would I.
I think he fits the blueprint.
Yeah. Players love him.
Motivator, good at dealing with, for the most part, good at dealing with kind of the sort of the statesman elements of the jobs and talking about stuff that sits outside football. And players would like him. I think he'd probably like it. I mean, can you imagine the noise around a German managing England, whether he'd want to do it and all that stuff? But I think I'd take him. I'd sort of
instinctively it just feels.
You take him over Pep.
Instinctively, it just
probably
feels so out of the question.
Yeah,
that Klopp would manage England that I just don't really see the
Poch.
Yeah, Poch. I mean,
but he's another one. Creates. I mean, I know Chelsea was a bit of a pretty chaotic this season, but he's someone who again seems to get massive buy-in from players. I honestly think, and I know the opinion on Klopp is pretty polarized about him as a guy, but like, I'd almost say the biggest trait who I want to be our next manager would be a really good guy who could continues just to make nice environments for players to go and play in.
Yeah,
and that's
someone that's thoughtful, which Southgate has been. He hasn't got every part right, but in that role, it's quite difficult to hit every single note correctly, I would suggest, both in terms of the football side, but also the media side, and basically being this like statesman for England as a nation sometimes, which is a role that, why should you be qualified for just because you're a football manager? He's not impulsive, which I think is good for international management. He's very measured.
Meticulous as well, by all accounts, in terms of the preparation and things. I mean, who can forget the love train?
Right. Yeah. He's very calm. Like, I think all of these are basically just good qualities for international management. So,
Jose Mourinho?
I just couldn't think of anything worse.
Nor could I.
I honestly couldn't. I mean, I think it'd be great for content. But you can tell from my expression that that's not that important for me.
I'm trying to think who would be. I mean, I know things went very wrong at Chelsea, but
Lee Carsley.
But Potter seems like an obvious one who fits like the Southgate mold of just like a nice man.
Yeah, who is good emotional intelligence.
Yeah, but then I do think what happened at Chelsea may have shown him up a little bit, possibly.
I think of all the names, he's probably the one that I'd be like, yeah, if Southgate's going to go, fine. Probably be pretty good.
In terms of English managers, it seems to be him or Eddie Howe, really.
Do you want Jason Tindall in the England setup? Imagine if Tindall won the World Cup in America.
I'm really enjoying talking about England with you guys. Turns out there's a lot to go at. Hope you've enjoyed episode 2 of NTT20, the England pod. Thanks to Dave. Thanks to George. Thank you for tuning in and listening. We really want to hear from you. At NTT20 pod on Twitter or any of our individual accounts is probably the best way to get through to us. Any questions, we will be tackling them in future episodes. We've got a whole summer's worth of content and conversation, so we want you guys to help fuel it and make sure we're hitting all the discussion points that you would like to hear us talk about. The next episode, we'll be talking about warm-up friendlies. We'll be talking about the left-back position and a little quiz as well.